Do you trust the mainstream media? A lot of Bluepillers will say, of course I trust the mainstream media. I get all my information about them from the mainstream media, and the government is basically my god. They will believe everything the government has to say. And to be honest, back in the days, I was exactly like that. I was a huge blue pillar. Everything the media had to say, I believed as the truth. Everything the government had to say or did, I believed as the truth. I truly believed that the government, the state was pure good, that they would value the interest of the masses above their own. But that was until I started learning about how the world really works. So I learned what mainstream media really was. It is not just a medium to inform the masses. It's a way of selling political agendas. And of course, some news is there to inform you. Basically more to entertain you, because if you really wanted to be informed, you had to do a deep dive into the subject, and you won't understand a conflict in just 10 minutes of news. And I basically discovered that the mainstream media was a way of pushing political agendas, aka propaganda. And basically propaganda is basically to convince people of a certain viewpoint. But how is the mainstream media pushing political agendas? Well, we've all heard about wokeness, of course, wokeism, equality, they want to push that narrative. Feminism, of course, they want to make sure that women are, stronger, better than men even. And of course, you all know about COVID, and you might have some own opinions about COVID. The thing is, they wanted to push a certain narrative. Also, a very obvious one is war. They want to push the population in believing a certain viewpoint about wars. About the war in Ukraine, about the war in the Middle East, maybe with China. But if you actually listen to other news outlets, in China, Russia, Brazil, all around the world, they will actually tell you quite a different story. So it's very opinionated, actually. They want to convince you from a certain viewpoint, a certain opinion. And once they've convinced you, the public is more susceptible to certain changes, to certain steps. For example, more equality for women in the working place. At least 50% of all CEOs have to be women. Or, for example, war. We are gonna send some F-16s or some Abraham tanks to Ukraine because, now the masses think it's okay. But if they didn't propagate that narrative, if they didn't tell them that, for example, Ukraine was a danger and they would send all kinds of weapons in there, the masses would think that the state is crazy. So basically, propaganda is used to convince people of a certain viewpoint. And in the state, it's a very good way, it's a very good weapon of doing that. But why follow certain political agendas? Well, of course, we all know about wokeism and feminism. It's basically directed at destroying the family unit. And basically family unit tradition, is basically the foundation of a society. And you have to look deep into the reasons why certain things are happening. And I think one of the reasons they want to destroy the family unit is because then we will have a population which is more depressed, more dependent on their boss, is gonna work more, buys more things because they are depressed. And I'm sure there are many other reasons, why this whole thing is happening. Or war, why are they pushing a certain narrative for war? Why are they basically telling people that war is okay, we should go to war instead of negotiate, Well, you might have heard about the military-industrial complex, and this is a huge war machine in the US. So basically the military-industrial complex is basically a few very, very giant corporations like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and a few others, who basically make weapons. And if there is a threat of war or there is a war going, they have to make a lot of weapons and they make a lot of profit. And a lot of those CEOs from those big companies have huge, big ties to the government, to the government directly. So if there's a big war, the government will spend more money to those big corporations, and those big corporations, they will make they will make more weapons, and they will earn more money in the process. And of course, the government can just print more money. So just the threat of war or a war itself is a huge benefit to the military industrial complex. And that's why one of the reasons why, news outlets are basically propagating, selling this war, for example, in the Middle East and of course Ukraine. And just to be clear, I didn't really wanted to take a political stance here on this channel, because I thought, many people have their own beliefs and I might make some enemies about that. But once you start realizing how the world really works, it's hard sometimes, to keep yourself from saying things which are obvious to you, but basically invisible to the others. One other big way of propaganda and role of propaganda was in the Second World War. And I always asked myself, like, how did that thing with the Jews ever happen? How did people got so fed up with it? Not only the military, but the population of Germany had genuine hate towards the Jews. How in the world is that possible? That's because of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda, Basically, those kids in Nazi Germany got bombarded with propaganda, Started from school, from 4 years old, even in their household. From 4 years old, they got taught in school about how they are better than the Jews and how the Jews are disgusting people. They had to read certain books. They heard it on the news, on the radio, everywhere around them. Their parents taught them to hate the Jews. It is crazy how people can be basically mind controlled. And that's what we see nowadays with all those blue-pilled weak men. Because they have been taught, from 4 years old that they should just be more, less masculine, they should be more feminine, they should open their feelings, be more weak, that's the way to go. And on top of that, women have been told to be more masculine. So how is the mainstream media pushing propaganda? And a very interesting way is Operation Mockingbird. And this is basically an operation by the CIA. And it started around the 1950s. So the way this operation was conducted was that the CIA had certain people on high positions in newspapers, in Hollywood, in news outlets. All these news outlets were infiltrated by CIA agents just to keep an eye on them, just to check them, what they are bringing out in the news. But not only that, the CIA gave huge sums of money to these news outlets just so they could have a say in what was being brought out. And because of this method, they actually changed a lot of movies. So they infiltrated these movies, they gave huge grants, and they actually had a say in what the movie was gonna be. So, and this was happening in movies, in the news, in the newspaper. And that's one of the reasons why just by watching movies, you'll be basically influenced by propaganda. Not always, but a lot of the times. And you don't even realize it because it's so, because they hide it well. The other day I was watching a movie. It's called Evil Dead Rise. It's basically a new movie. It's a horror movie, and the movie starts like this. So there was a woman with 2 kids, a girl and a boy. And of course, the man is out of the family because she left him. She's a strong woman. She had a girl, a daughter. And the daughter had short hair, was really masculine, was a hard feminist, And you can guess what the boy was, right? He had some earring, he had, he's really, really feminine. And all these things, and of course the girl was really masculine and way more masculine than the boy. And all these things, it made me so fed up, I didn't even enjoy the movie anymore because of that. But if you don't notice, you will just see past it. So, Operation Mockingbird, basically how the CIA infiltrated movies and news outlets, is actually still going strong today. Because today they are still granting huge sums of money to independent news outlets, And not only the CIA, also the government. And this is part of the reason why like normal news outlets can't cover real news. Because if they would cover real news, their funding would stop immediately. They would basically go bankrupt. These news outlets, these movies are state funded. Just look at this video fragment, these news outlets are basically being told what to say to the public.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
And it's actually crazy, we actually have this war on misinformation, because those news outlets are claiming that everything that's not coming from them is basically misinformation and fake news. All those independent researchers which are not state funded are basically fake news and bringing you misinformation. And this is the way they in Holland they had a certain word for it, a certain word for somebody who didn't listen to the news. It's basically complotgekkie. It's like conspiracy crazy person, always looking for conspiracies. But these things which I've told you today are no conspiracies. You can just check it on fucking Google. Just check the research papers, Operation Mockingbird. And I will tell you some other things now, I will tell you how the world really works. And I cannot go into full detail here because the video would be way too long. So it's not only the media that's influenced by the state, by huge grants of money, but they often just bring pure fake news. And that's actually crazy. But you only realize this if you start to understand how the world really works and you dive deeper into certain subjects. For example, the news outlets and the government, they want you to think that they are the big brother, that they are the good ones, that they are the freedom warriors, And that's the narrative they bring out. And of course you have to believe in the state. Of course you have to be, because otherwise we would have a revolution. But they basically want you to think that they are the good guys. They don't want you to know certain things, because if you start to realize how the world really works, you start to realize that they are not always the good guys. So one thing they don't want you to know is for example, the war in Iraq. So the US went to war with like 7 countries in the Middle East, and it's fucking crazy, The reason why the US went to war with Iraq was of suspicions of weapons of mass destructions. And these are basically nuclear weapons, because the president at the time, George W. Bush, actually told told the masses on the media, like, we have to infiltrate that country because they have weapons of mass destructions. And the funny thing is, the US government actually knew that they didn't have weapons of mass destruction because of, people on the ground there. They actually told the US government there is no weapons of mass destruction here. But they infiltrated anyway. And why? Partly because of oil, because Iraq had a lot of oil. So they infiltrated Iraq, bombed the shit out of that whole country, and took all the oil. A win-win situation. And they sold the masses that they were freedom bringers, because the name of the operation was Operation Iraqi Freedom. And it's actually crazy, And this is not just some conspiracy thing, you know. Donald Trump, for example, has spoke against this. So he has one interview where he is actually telling the people, like, the war in Iraq was false. We knew that there weren't weapons of mass destruction and we went in anyway. But the normal media, the newspapers would never tell you that, because otherwise they would lose their funding. So it's very important for you to actually listen to an independent news outlets. And if you go down to the description, I will basically show you the news outlets where I am listening to. So if you're interested in, for example, economics, geopolitics, or certain other things, you can just check out those sources because they are pretty good. And I think it's very important for you to actually start understanding how the world really works. Because if you understand how the world works, you can make better choices in life. And you won't be like those blue-pilled motherfuckers who just believe everything the government has to say. Spartans, prepare for glory.